I'm so glad you're here today. I need to tell someone this story. I need it to travel far and wide, because if it helps just one person open their eyes, then my own nightmare will have found some kind of meaning. So please, settle in. Maybe grab a cup of coffee. What I'm about to tell you is the story of how my entire world, a world I had spent a lifetime building with love and trust, was shattered by a single, 7-word sentence. It all started on a Tuesday. I remember it was a beautiful afternoon, the kind of early autumn day in Ohio where the sun feels warm on your skin but the air has a crisp little bite to it. The maple trees outside my window were just starting to turn, their leaves blushing with shades of gold and crimson. I was in the kitchen, humming along to an old Motown song on the radio, carefully placing a finished apple pie on the cooling rack. The smell of cinnamon and baked apples filled the house, a scent I've always associated with love and family. It was my son David's favorite. He'd been with his fiancée, Tiffany, for 3 years, and I was just bursting with excitement for their future. I had been setting money aside, planning, dreaming of their wedding day. I pictured the ceremony, the flowers, the look on David's face when he'd see Tiffany walking down the aisle. I'd already bought my mother of the groom dress, a beautiful dusty blue gown that cost a small fortune, but I didn't care. Nothing was too much for my only son. My late husband, Frank, and I had always dreamed of this day. Frank passed 5 years ago, but I felt his presence in every corner of that house, and I knew he'd be so proud. He left me financially secure, and my greatest joy was using that security to make life easier for David, to give him the start Frank and I never had. So, there I was, in my sun-drenched kitchen, feeling nothing but happiness. I picked up my phone, my fingers sticky with a little bit of pie filling, and I dialed Tiffany's number. My heart was doing a little fluttery dance. They'd been engaged for a year, and I was getting antsy. I wanted to help with the planning, to be involved. I thought maybe I could gently nudge them to finally set a date. The phone rang twice, and then her voice, smooth as silk, came on the line. "Hi, Carol." "What's up?" I could hear the sound of traffic in the background, like she was in her car. "Hi, honey," I said, my voice warm. "I was just calling to chat." I baked one of David's favorites and was thinking, we haven't talked about the wedding in a while. I was just so excited. I was wondering if you two had thought any more about picking a date. There was a pause on the other end. It wasn't a long pause, maybe just a second or two, but it felt heavy. The sound of the traffic seemed to fade away, replaced by a strange, crackling static in the air. I could almost feel the shift in atmosphere through the phone. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its breezy warmth. It was replaced by something else, something cool and detached, almost clinical. And then she said the 7 words that felt like a punch straight to my soul, knocking all the air from my lungs. "Oh," she said, with a little chilling laugh. "We got married yesterday, Carol." Silence. The world just stopped. The Motown song on the radio seemed to warp and fade into a distant, mocking echo. The sweet smell of apple pie suddenly turned sickeningly sweet, clogging my throat. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, my knuckles white as I gripped it. I think my mouth was open, but no sound came out. My brain was trying to process the words, trying to fit them into some kind of context that made sense, but it couldn't. It was like trying to solve an impossible equation. Married. Yesterday. What? The word came out as a strangled whisper. It was the only sound I could manage. "Yeah," Tiffany continued, and this time her voice was dripping with a kind of casual cruelty, the kind you use when you're swatting away a fly. "It was just a small thing. Super last minute. We just went down to the courthouse. You know how we are? We hate a big fuss." A small thing. A fuss. My mind reeled. For 3 years, I had poured my heart, my time, and a significant amount of my savings into their lives. I paid the down payment on their condo in that trendy downtown district because David's salary as a graphic designer wasn't quite enough. I co-signed the loan for Tiffany's brand new SUV because her credit was, in her words, a little complicated. I paid for their vacations to Napa Valley, their dinners at fancy restaurants, The designer handbag she just had to have for her birthday. I did it all without a second thought, because that's what a mother does. You give. You support. You love. I wasn't just their mother. I was their safety net, their benefactor, their biggest cheerleader. And in return, my son's wedding, the single most important day of his life, was reduced to a small thing I wasn't important enough to be a part of. But why didn't you tell me? I finally managed to ask, and I hated how my voice trembled, how weak and broken it sounded. Oh, Carol, she sighed, a long, exaggerated sound of impatience. It was just for immediate family. Very intimate. We didn't want to bother anyone. Immediate family. The words were a physical blow. Her parents were there. I knew it without even having to ask. Her sister, who I'd met twice, was probably the maid of honor. They were immediate family. But I, the woman who gave birth to the groom, the woman who financed the very life they were living, I was a bother. I couldn't speak. A thick, hot lump was forming in my throat, choking me. I could hear her tapping on her steering wheel, impatient to get off the phone. She had delivered her news, dropped her bomb, and now she was ready to move on with her day, leaving me in the rubble. Well, I gotta run, she said, her voice bright again, as if our conversation was as trivial as discussing the weather. Stuck in traffic. We'll talk soon. Say hi to David for me when you see him. And then she hung up. The dial tone buzzed in my ear. A monotonous, empty sound that filled the sudden, deafening silence of my kitchen. I slowly lowered the phone, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped it on the tile floor. I stared at the apple pie on the counter. David's favorite. A symbol of my love, my care, my constant, unwavering presence in his life. And it felt like a monument to my own foolishness. I sank into a kitchen chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. The sun was still streaming through the window. The leaves were still beautiful, but all the color had drained from my world. All I could feel was a cold, creeping numbness spreading through my veins. I sat there for I don't know how long, just staring into space. Then, a notification lit up my phone screen. It was a new post on social media. My thumb moved on its own, a morbid curiosity guiding it. And there it was. A picture Tiffany had just posted. Her, in a chic white courthouse dress, holding a bouquet of white roses. And next to her, my son, David. My beautiful boy, in a sharp navy suit, smiling for the camera. His arm was wrapped around his new wife. Behind them stood Tiffany's parents and her sister, all of them beaming, champagne flutes raised in a toast. The caption read, "Surprise. The best day of our lives with the people who matter most. Number Mr. and Mrs. Harris. Number eloped, number immediate family only. The people who matter most." I scrolled through the pictures, each one a fresh stab to the heart. There was one of Tiffany showing off her new ring, her hand resting on David's. Another of them kissing on the courthouse steps. There were dozens of comments flooding in. "Congratulations! So happy for you both. Stunning couple." Not a single person asked, "Where's your mom, David?" Not a single person seemed to notice my glaring absence. It was as if I had been completely and utterly erased. That's when the numbness finally broke, and the pain hit me like a tidal wave. It was a raw, agonizing grief, the kind I hadn't felt since the day I lost Frank. I wrapped my arms around myself, hunched over in my chair, and I began to sob. Not quiet, gentle tears, but huge, body-racking sobs that tore through my chest and left me breathless. I cried for the dress hanging in my closet. I cried for the wedding gift I'd already bought a check that would have paid off the rest of their car loan. I cried for my late husband, who would be turning in his grave if he knew how our son had treated me. But most of all, I cried for the naive, trusting mother I had been. The mother who thought that unconditional love and generosity would be met with, at the very least, a little bit of respect. I was wrong. I had been so wrong. And as I sat there, alone in my silent, sunlit kitchen, with the smell of a pie no one was coming to eat, I felt something shift inside me. The deep, aching sadness began to curdle, hardening into something else, something cold, sharp, and heavy. It felt like a stone forming right where my heart used to be, and a quiet, dangerous thought whispered through my grief. This is not over. If you're watching this, and you've ever felt invisible to the people you love the most, please, like this video and subscribe to my channel. I need to know I'm not alone in this. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far my story has traveled. Because what happened next, well, what happened next is the reason I'm sitting here today. They thought they could erase me. They were about to find out that a mother's love is a powerful thing. But a mother's fury? That's something else entirely. That night, I didn't sleep. Not a single minute. The image of their smiling faces on my phone screen was burned into the back of my eyelids. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them: David, my son, who I had rocked to sleep as a baby, and Tiffany, the woman I had welcomed into my heart as a daughter, toasting to a new life that I was explicitly, cruelly, excluded from. The pain from the initial shock had subsided, leaving behind a chilling clarity. It was like standing in the calm, quiet eye of a hurricane. The world around me was a disaster, but in that one small space, my mind was perfectly, frighteningly still. The next morning, I moved through my house like a ghost. The sun rose, casting long shadows across the living room floor, but I didn't notice its warmth. I took the apple pie, which was still sitting on the counter, a tragic monument to my love, and I walked it out to the trash can. I didn't hesitate. As the tin plate clattered into the bin, I felt a strange sense of finality. I wasn't just throwing away a pie. I was throwing away the role I had been playing for years. The endlessly giving, endlessly forgiving mother who baked away her loneliness and paid for affection with her savings. That Carol, the one who hummed Motown in her kitchen, was gone. I wasn't sure who was left in her place, but I knew she was someone they had never met before. I spent the day in a daze, mechanically going through the motions of life. I tidied the house, folded laundry, paid some bills online. All the while, my phone sat on the kitchen table, silent. David didn't call. He didn't text. It was as if he knew he had detonated a bomb in my life and was simply waiting for the dust to settle, assuming I would sweep up the debris myself, as I always did. The silence was, in its own way, more damning than Tiffany's lie. It was a silence of cowardice. He couldn't even face me. He had sent his new wife to do his dirty work. Finally, around 4 in the afternoon, the phone rang. David's picture flashed on the screen, a photo I'd taken of him last Christmas, smiling in a goofy sweater I'd knitted for him. My heart gave a painful lurch. For a fleeting moment, the old Carol, the hopeful mother, resurfaced. Maybe it was all a terrible misunderstanding. Maybe he would apologize, explain everything, and we could somehow fix this. I took a deep breath, my hand trembling as I answered. "Hi, Mum." His voice was cautious, testing the waters. "David," I said. My own voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. I couldn't have faked warmth if my life depended on it. "So, I hear you talked to Tiffany," he began, and the casualness in his tone was like a splash of gasoline on the embers of my anger. "Yes, I did," I replied. "She told me the news. Congratulations." The word tasted like poison in my mouth. He let out a nervous little laugh. "Yeah, thanks. Look, Mom, I know you're probably a little upset." A little upset. The understatement of the century. My world had been ripped apart, and he thought I was a little upset. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles turning white. "Why, David?" I asked, the question tearing from my throat. "Why wouldn't you tell me? I'm your mother." He sighed, the same sound of weary impatience Tiffany had made. It was clearly a sound they had practiced. "Mom, please don't make a big deal out of this. We knew you'd want to turn it into this huge, elaborate thing. You get overwrought. Tiffany and I just wanted something simple, something that was just about us. No stress, no drama. I was the drama. I was the stress. My desire to celebrate my only son's marriage was a burden. Every dollar I had spent, every sacrifice I had made, every tear I had cried for his happiness, had culminated in me being labeled overwrought. "And your father and I saved for your wedding since the day you were born," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "The dress I bought is hanging in my closet. The gift I was going to give you is sitting on my desk. Was all of that just drama to you? See? This is exactly what I'm talking about, he said, his voice rising in frustration. You always make everything about what you've done, about the money. We just wanted one day that wasn't about that. It wasn't a slap in the face, Mom. It was just easier this way. Easier for him. That was the crux of it. My feelings, my presence, my very existence as his mother had been deemed an inconvenience to be managed. And the easiest way to manage it was to cut me out entirely. The coldness of his logic was breathtaking. Her parents were there, David, I stated, not as a question but as a fact. There was a brief pause. Well, yeah, he said defensively. Tiffany is really close with them, and her dad helped with the paperwork. It was just a logistics thing. It wasn't personal. Not personal. Being replaced, being deemed less important than paperwork, was not personal. I felt a bitter laugh bubble up inside me, but I choked it down. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of hearing me break. I see, I said, the two words carrying the weight of 1,000 heartbreaks. Well, I hope you and your immediate family had a wonderful day. Oh, Mom, come on, don't be like that, he started, but I couldn't listen to another word. I have to go, David, I said, my voice like ice, and I hung up. This time, I didn't cry. I just stood there, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The stone in my chest felt bigger, heavier. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had justified it. He had twisted my love and generosity into a character flaw, painting me as a dramatic, overbearing mother he had to escape from. The narrative had been written, and I was the villain of his story. I spent the next 2 days in a self-imposed exile, not answering my phone, not looking at social media. I needed to think. I needed to understand how I had gotten here. I walked through my quiet house, picking up photographs. David's first steps, his kindergarten graduation, the family trip to the Grand Canyon after Frank was gone, a trip I took to remind my grieving son that we were still a family, that I would always be there. In every photo, I saw a mother who had devoted her entire existence to her son's happiness. I had made him the center of my universe, and in doing so, I had allowed him to believe that the universe did, in fact, revolve around him. And Tiffany, I thought back to all the little red flags I had so willingly ignored. The way her eyes would light up when I offered to pay for something. The constant emergencies that only my checkbook could solve. Last year, she needed emergency cosmetic dental work veneers because a magazine she was interviewing with for a marketing job apparently required a perfect smile. It cost me $7,000. Money I took from my retirement account. David had assured me it was a crucial career investment. Looking back, I saw the pattern with sickening clarity. They were a team, and I wasn't their mother. I was their mark. I went to my office and pulled out my financial records. I had never tallied it all up before, afraid of what the number might look like. Now, I needed to see it. I needed to face the full scope of my own blindness. The down payment on the condo, $50,000. The co-signed SUV, on which I had been making the payments for the last 6 months because they were always a little short, another $4,800. The vacations, the dinners, the shopping sprees, the emergency cash infusions. I typed the numbers into a calculator, my hand steady. The hours ticked by as I sifted through 3 years of bank statements and credit card bills. When I finally hit the total button, I stared at the number on the screen. I felt my breath catch. 11,250 美元. Over $100,000. Money Frank had worked his entire life for. Money he had left to me so I could live my final years in peace and security. I had given it away, piece by piece, to 2 people who considered me a bother. I looked at the statement for my investment portfolio. I saw the stocks I'd sold, stocks Frank had bought, cherished parts of his legacy to fund their lifestyle. I felt a wave of nausea. It wasn't just money. It was a betrayal of him, too. The phone rang again. This time, it was Tiffany. I almost didn't answer. But the new, cold part of me was curious. What could she possibly want now? I answered, without a word. Carol, hi! Her voice was back to being syrupy sweet, as if the last conversation had never happened. I was just calling to see how you are. We were so worried when you didn't answer. David said you were a little upset, and we just feel terrible about that. I remained silent. Anyway, she continued, undeterred, we have the most exciting news. David and I were thinking, now that we're officially married, it's time to start our lives properly. This condo is great, but it's not a real family home, you know? It's not a place to raise grandkids. The bait. She was dangling the one thing she knew I wanted more than anything in the world. Grandchildren. We found the most perfect little house over in the Westwood neighborhood. It's got a yard, 3 bedrooms. It's a little bit of a fixer-upper, but it's got such good bones. The thing is, the market is so crazy, and we'd need to put down a pretty significant down payment to even be considered, and we were thinking, since you were so generous with the condo. She let the sentence hang in the air, the unspoken request thick and heavy. I could picture her on the other end, a smug little smile on her face, completely confident that I would fall for it, that the mention of grandkids would open my wallet once more. And in that moment, something inside me finally, irrevocably, snapped. The grief, the pain, the regret, it all vanished, replaced by a feeling as clear and hard as diamond. No, I said. The silence on her end was immediate and absolute. It was so quiet I could hear the hum of my own refrigerator. What did you say? She stammered, all traces of sweetness gone from her voice. I said no, I repeated, and my voice was calm. It was the calm of a pilot who has to land a crashing plane. I will not be giving you any more money. Not for a house. Not for anything. But, this is for our future. For your grandchildren, she sputtered, her voice rising in panic. Tiffany? I said, and for the first time in 3 years I felt a surge of power. The bank is closed. It is permanently and irrevocably closed. I could hear her breathing quicken, turning into angry little huffs. The mask had slipped completely. You can't do this, she hissed. We had plans. We were counting on you. David will be furious. You are going to regret this, Carol. You are going to end up a bitter, lonely old woman with no one. And then she hung up on me, the call ending with an angry click. I stood there in my office, the phone still in my hand. A bitter, lonely old woman. Maybe she was right. But as I looked at the spreadsheet on my computer screen, at the 6-figure sum of my foolishness, I knew one thing for sure. I may be lonely, but I would not be poor, and I would not be their victim anymore. The fight wasn't over. I knew that. My name was still on the loan for her SUV. I had signed legal documents that tied me to them financially. This wouldn't be as simple as just saying no. They had enmeshed me in their lives not with love but with paperwork. And I realized with a new and terrifying clarity that untangling myself was going to be a war they had already started. I closed the spreadsheet, shut down the computer, and walked over to my desk. I pulled out the phone book. I had given them everything they wanted for years. Now, it was time to give them something they never saw coming. It was time to see a lawyer. The lawyer's office was in one of those cold, modern glass buildings downtown that always made me feel small. The name on the door was Miller and Finch, Attorneys at Law. I had chosen Mr. Miller because he had handled Frank's will with a quiet competence that I had found immensely comforting in my grief. He was an older man, with a shock of white hair and the kind of steady, unreadable eyes that I imagine all good lawyers have. I hadn't seen him in 5 years, but when his secretary showed me into his office, he stood up and greeted me with a warm, genuine smile. Carol, it's good to see you. Though I'm sorry it's under these circumstances, he said, gesturing for me to sit in one of the plush leather chairs opposite his enormous oak desk. Your voice on the phone. You sounded distressed. I sat down, my handbag clutched in my lap like a shield. I had brought a file with me. It was thick with bank statements, credit card bills, and copies of the loan documents I had signed. I had spent the entire previous night organizing it, highlighting every transaction related to David and Tiffany. The folder felt like it weighed 100 pounds. It was the physical manifestation of my own naivety. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice, Arthur, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm afraid I've gotten myself into a bit of a mess. He leaned back in his chair, his expression patient. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning." And so I did. I told him the whole story. I started with the phone call, the casual cruelty of Tiffany's words, the crushing disappointment of the secret wedding. I told him about David's justification, his accusations that I was overwrought and a source of drama. And then I opened my file. I slid the documents across his desk, one by one. I walked him through the numbers, my voice flat and factual as I detailed the $50,000 for the condo, the ongoing payments for the SUV, the vacations, the veneers, the endless stream of cash that had flowed from my accounts into theirs. I watched his face as he reviewed the papers. His warm smile had vanished, replaced by a grim, focused line. He would occasionally look up at me, his gaze sharp, taking in every detail. When I finished, I felt emotionally exhausted, as if I had just run a marathon. The silence in his office was thick. Mr. Miller picked up the cosigner agreement for Tiffany's SUV, his eyes scanning the fine print. He tapped a manicured finger on a specific clause. "Carol," he said, and his voice was gentle but firm. "This is what we call financial entanglement. You haven't just been generous. You've made yourself legally responsible for their debts." End quote. I nodded, a fresh wave of shame washing over me. "I know. I trusted him. He's my son. I never thought—" "Of course you didn't," he said, his voice softening with empathy. "You're a mother, but they have used your love and your trust as leverage. This is, in its most insidious form, a type of elder financial abuse." The words hung in the air between us. Elder financial abuse. I had read articles about it, seen stories on the news about lonely seniors being scammed by strangers. I never once imagined it could apply to me, to my relationship with my own son. It sounded so clinical, so ugly. But as he said it, I knew it was the truth. I hadn't been giving gifts. I had been funding an exploitation. "What can I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "My name is on that car loan. I'm legally obligated to pay if they don't." "Yes, you are," he confirmed, his expression serious. "And getting your name off a co-signed loan is notoriously difficult. The lender has no incentive to release you from the obligation. Why would they let go of a guarantor with perfect credit?" He paused, steepling his fingers. "But it's not impossible. Our first step is to formally notify the lender, and David and Tiffany, that you will no longer be making voluntary payments. We'll demand that they refinance the vehicle in Tiffany's name alone. Given what you've told me about her credit, that's unlikely to be approved." "Oh, so I'm stuck," I said, the hope that had been flickering inside me starting to dim. "Not necessarily," he countered. "It just means we have to apply pressure. We need to build a case. We will send them a formal demand letter, outlining every dollar you have given them over the past 3 years. We won't call it a gift. We will frame it as a series of undocumented, informal loans. We will demand repayment." I was stunned. "But I gave it to them freely. It was a gift." "Oh, was it, Carol?" he asked, his gaze piercing. "Or was there an implicit understanding that your generosity was part of a familial bond? A bond they have now flagrantly violated. They broke the social contract. Now, we use the legal one." He leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "They will almost certainly refuse to pay. They will call it a ridiculous shakedown. But that's the point. Their refusal becomes part of our leverage. It establishes a pattern of financial irresponsibility and exploitation. It's the first move in a much longer chess game." I felt a dizzying mix of fear and relief. The idea of suing my own son was horrifying. But the idea of having a strategy, a plan, a way to fight back, it was empowering. For the first time in days, I felt like I wasn't just a victim. I could be a player. "What about the condo?" I asked. "I gave them the money for the down payment." "That's more complicated," he admitted. "A gift for a down payment is typically documented as such for the mortgage company. It will be difficult to claw that back directly. However, it's a very large number, and it looks very damning on paper. It helps us build the narrative. It shows that their entire lifestyle is a house of cards built with your money." I left his office an hour later with a clear plan of action. He would draft the demand letter and the notification to the auto lender. My job, he said, was to go home and change every single password on my online banking and investment accounts. He also advised me to check my credit report immediately to make sure they hadn't opened any other lines of credit in my name without my knowledge. As I walked out into the bright afternoon sun, my phone buzzed in my purse. It was a text from David. "Mom, this has gone on long enough. Tiffany is very upset. We need to talk about the house. Call me." I stared at the message, a cold fury rising within me. They were doubling down. They genuinely believed that after everything that had happened, they could still bully and manipulate me into buying them a house. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. I deleted the text without replying. The time for talking was over. Now, my lawyer would do the talking for me. When I got home, I did exactly as Mr. Miller had advised. I spent 2 hours changing passwords, setting up two-factor authentication, and combing through my credit report. To my immense relief, there were no unauthorized accounts, but the exercise was sobering. I had to treat my own child like a potential identity thief. The thought made my heart ache, but the stone in my chest told me it was necessary. I was no longer protecting a son. I was protecting myself from a predator. The next few days were a tense waiting game. Mr. Miller sent the letters via certified mail. I imagined the moment the postman arrived at their condo. I pictured Tiffany signing for the envelopes, her brow furrowed in curiosity. I pictured them opening them together, their expressions shifting from confusion to outrage to pure, unadulterated panic as they read the cold, legal language demanding repayment of over $100,000. The explosion came on a Friday evening. My phone rang, and it was David. This time I was ready. I put the phone on speaker, a small digital recorder I had bought that afternoon sitting next to it. Mr. Miller had told me that in Ohio, it was legal to record a conversation as long as one party consented, and I was giving my own consent. "What the hell is this?" His voice wasn't a question. It was a roar. I could hear Tiffany sobbing dramatically in the background. "Hello, David," I said calmly. "Don't you? Hello, David. Me?" he screamed, his voice cracking with rage. "We got a letter from some lawyer. A demand for money. Are you insane? Are you actually trying to sue us?" "I'm simply requesting repayment for the loans I provided," I said, my voice as level as a frozen lake, repeating the words Mr. Miller had coached me to use. "Loans?" he shrieked. "Those were gifts. You gave us that money. You were happy to do it." "I was happy to help my son and his fiancée build a life together, yes," I replied. "I was under the impression I was part of that life. It seems I was mistaken." "This is because of the wedding, isn't it?" He spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You are going to destroy our lives over a stupid party. I cannot believe how unbelievably selfish you are, after everything we've done to include you." The hypocrisy was so profound, it was almost laughable. They had included me? "And now this letter about the car," he continued, his rant gaining momentum. "They're going to take Tiffany's car away. She needs that for her job. How is she supposed to get to work?" "I imagine she'll have to figure that out," I said simply. There was a choked sound on his end, and then Tiffany's voice, shrill and hysterical, took over. "You are a monster, Carol, a vindictive, evil old woman. You are trying to ruin us. We'll be homeless. We'll have nothing." "You have a condo that I paid the down payment for," I reminded her gently. "You have jobs. What you no longer have is a blank check from me." "Oh, you will regret this." David's voice cut back in, low and menacing. "I swear to God, Mom, you have no idea what you've just started. We will fight this. We will see you in court. And we will tell everyone our friends, the family, everyone exactly what kind of cruel, manipulative person you really are." The line went dead. I sat in the silence, my heart hammering against my ribs. The threat was clear. They weren't just going to fight me legally, they were going to launch a smear campaign. They were going to try to isolate me, to turn everyone against me, to paint me as the villain. I looked at the little recorder, its red light blinking steadily. I had it all on tape. Their rage, their sense of entitlement, their threats. I realized then that Mr. Miller was right. This was a chess game, and they had just made their next move. But I had made a move of my own. I had built a cage of financial generosity around them for years, and they had mistaken it for a palace. They didn't realize that I was the one who held the key, and I was finally ready to lock the door. The lonely old woman they had threatened me with was not who I was going to be. I was going to be the architect of my own freedom, even if I had to dismantle the life I had built for them, brick by painful brick. The weeks that followed the phone call were a masterclass in psychological warfare. David and Tiffany, true to their word, began their campaign immediately. It wasn't a loud, overt attack, but something far more insidious. It was a war fought in whispers, in concerned phone calls to relatives, and in carefully curated posts on social media. They were positioning themselves as the bewildered, heartbroken victims of a mother's sudden and inexplicable mental decline. It started with my sister, Jean. She called me on a Sunday morning, her voice laced with a worried tone I hadn't heard in years. "Carol, I just got off the phone with David," she began without any preamble. He's beside himself. He told me about the lawyer's letter. Honey, what on earth is going on? He said you're trying to take their home and their car. He said you've cut him off completely, all because you were upset about their wedding. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. So, this was the narrative. I wasn't the one who was betrayed. I was the one exacting a petty, disproportionate revenge. Jean, that's not the whole story, I said, trying to keep my voice even. They married in secret and didn't even bother to tell me until after the fact. For years, I've given them over $100,000, and they treated me like an inconvenience. $100,000? Jean gasped. Carol, that's an incredible amount of money. But David said it was all gifts. He said you enjoyed helping them. Now he says you've suddenly changed. He's worried about you, Carol. He said you're not acting like yourself. He mentioned you've been isolating yourself, that maybe you're not well. He thinks you might be depressed since Frank passed, and it's finally catching up with you. There it was. The first poison dart. It wasn't just that I was cruel, I was unwell. My rational, calculated decision to protect myself was being reframed as a symptom of mental instability. They weren't greedy or ungrateful. They were concerned children. It was brilliant. It was diabolical. I am not unwell, Jean, I said, my voice sharp with a frustration I couldn't hide. I am angry. There's a difference. Is there? She asked softly, and her doubt was like a physical sting. David is talking about maybe staging an intervention, getting the family together to talk to you. He and Tiffany are just so scared you're going to end up all alone. An intervention. Not to apologize, not to seek reconciliation, but to diagnose me, to pressure me, with the full weight of the family, into resuming my role as their personal bank. They were trying to weaponize the family's love for me against me. The calls kept coming. My cousin from Florida, David's godmother, called to tell me she was praying for me. Frank's brother, my brother-in-law, called with a gruff, awkward offer to talk some sense into me. Each conversation was the same. They had all heard David and Tiffany's version of the story first, a version in which they were the loving, patient children dealing with a difficult, potentially unstable mother. The most painful blow came from social media. Tiffany, who had always been a prolific poster, began to craft a subtle but devastating narrative online. She didn't mention me by name, but she didn't have to. She posted a photo of her and David, their faces looking somber and brave. The caption read, "Going through some incredibly difficult family challenges right now. It's heartbreaking when the people you love most don't seem to be themselves anymore. Sending love to everyone navigating the complexities of mental health in their families. Number family first. Number mental health awareness." The post was flooded with comments of support. "Stay strong! Thinking of you both. It's so hard watching a parent decline." My own friends, women I had known for decades, were liking the post, offering their sympathy to the very people who were orchestrating my character assassination. I felt a profound sense of isolation, as if the walls of my own life were closing in on me. They were methodically and skillfully turning my entire social circle against me, poisoning the wells of support I would need most. I called Mr. Miller. my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and despair. "They're telling everyone I'm mentally ill, Arthur. They're trying to discredit me before we even set foot in a courtroom." "I expected this, Carol," he said, his voice a calm anchor in my storm. "It's a classic tactic. If they can paint you as irrational, then your claims of financial abuse seem less credible. They're not just fighting a legal battle, they're fighting a public relations battle. And you, my dear, are the only casualty they care about." He paused. "Do not engage. Do not post anything online. Do not defend yourself in angry phone calls. Let them talk. Every lie they tell is another piece of thread in the rope they're hanging themselves with. Just keep documenting everything." So I did. I took screenshots of Tiffany's posts. I made notes of every phone call, who had called, and the narrative they had been fed. I retreated into my home, which had started to feel less like a sanctuary and more like a bunker. The loneliness was crushing. The doubt began to creep in during the long, quiet nights. Was I doing the right thing? Was I becoming the bitter, vindictive woman they claimed I was? I would look at the photo of Frank on my nightstand and ask him what he would do. And in the silence, I imagined his steady voice telling me to fight, to protect what he had worked so hard to build, to protect my own dignity. Meanwhile, the legal gears were turning. David and Tiffany, through their new, high-powered lawyer, formally rejected our demand for repayment. Their response was a masterpiece of legal indignation, calling my claims frivolous, unfounded, and a clear attempt to harass and extort money from a loving son and his new wife. They also refused to refinance the SUV, stating that since I had willingly and eagerly entered into the co-signer agreement, I was legally bound to it, and they had no intention of releasing me from my familial obligation. "Good," Mr. Miller said when I read him the letter over the phone. "This is exactly what we wanted. They have put their arrogance in writing. Now, we file the lawsuit." The day he filed the official complaint in civil court, I felt a tremor of fear. This was real now. There was no turning back. The lawsuit wasn't just about the money. It was about the truth. I was suing my own son to force him to acknowledge the reality of his own actions. The response from their side was swift and brutal. Their lawyer filed a countersuit. It was a dizzying document filled with legalese, but the core of it was a shocking accusation. They were suing me for emotional distress. They claimed my sudden and hostile actions, my meritless legal threats, and my campaign of harassment had caused them severe anxiety and emotional pain. They were seeking damages. They weren't just refusing to pay me back. They were demanding that I pay them for the inconvenience of being held accountable. But buried deep within the countersuit was their most dangerous move yet. It was a single, chilling paragraph. It stated that due to my increasingly erratic behavior, emotional instability, and demonstrated inability to manage my own affairs, they were petitioning the court for a competency hearing. They were formally requesting that the court appoint a legal guardian to oversee my finances and personal affairs, a guardian to protect me from myself. And they had a candidate in mind for who that guardian should be. My son, David. I read the words, and the blood drained from my face. This was their endgame. It had never just been about the house. It was about everything. My savings, my investments, my home, my pension, everything Frank and I had ever built. If they could have me declared legally incompetent, they wouldn't need to ask for my money anymore. It would all belong to them. They would have total, absolute control. The smear campaign, the whispers about my mental health, it hadn't just been about discrediting me. It had been laying the groundwork for this. They had been building their case all along, not for a civil suit, but for a hostile takeover of my entire life. I stared at the legal document in my hands, my heart pounding with a terror so profound it made me feel cold to the bone. They weren't just trying to rob me. They were trying to erase me, to turn me into a non-person, a ward of the state with my own son holding the puppet strings. I thought of the intervention my sister had mentioned. It wasn't just a family meeting. It was a fact-finding mission. They were gathering anecdotes, twisting my grief and anger into evidence of my decline. The cage I thought I was locking them out of was one they were trying to build around me. I had thought I was the architect of my own freedom, But I suddenly realized, with horrifying clarity, that for the past 3 years I had been the architect of my own cage, and they were about to slam the door shut and throw away the key. This was no longer a chess game. It was a fight for my life. The petition for guardianship landed like a declaration of war. It was no longer a dispute over money. It was a battle for my autonomy, my identity, my very right to exist as an independent person. The terror I felt was primal. The idea of David, the son who had so casually discarded me, the son who I now knew was capable of such profound cruelty, holding legal power over every aspect of my life, was a vision straight out of a nightmare. I imagined him selling my home, the home I had shared with Frank, the home filled with a lifetime of memories, and using the proceeds to buy his and Tiffany's dream house in Westwood. The thought was so violating it made me physically ill. I was back in Mr. Miller's office the next morning, the countersuit papers trembling in my hand. "They can't do this, can they?" I asked, my voice thin and reedy. "They can't just take my life away from me?" Mr. Miller's face was a granite mask of controlled fury. He took the documents from me, his eyes scanning the page with a speed that spoke of decades of experience. "They can certainly try," he said, his voice a low growl. "This is a despicable, bottom-feeding tactic, Carol, but it's not an uncommon one. When the money tap is turned off, the greedy get desperate, and desperate people do ugly things." He looked up at me, his gaze direct and unwavering. "This is going to be the hardest part of the fight. They will try to dissect your life, your decisions, your every word and action, and twist it into a portrait of incompetence. Are you ready for that?" Was I ready? Was anyone ever ready to have their sanity put on trial by their own child? I thought of Frank. I thought of the promise I had made to him in the quiet of the hospital room before he passed, that I would live a full, happy life, that I would be strong. I straightened my shoulders. "What do we do now?" I asked. "Now, we fight back with facts and with fire," he said, a glint of steel in his eyes. "First, the court will appoint a neutral third party, a guardian ad litem, to investigate the claim. This person will be our first and most important audience. They will interview you, David, Tiffany, and anyone else they deem relevant, your sister, your friends, your doctors. They will review your financial records, your medical history. Our job is to give them a mountain of evidence so high that it proves, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that you are not only competent, but exceptionally so, and that your son's petition is not born of concern, but of pure, unadulterated greed. The first step was a full-scale medical and psychiatric evaluation. Not because we believed for a second that I was incompetent, but to get ahead of their accusations. Mr. Miller sent me to a forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Lena Hansen, a woman who specialized in competency assessments for the court. She was sharp, clinical, and asked questions that were so probing they felt like tiny scalpels dissecting my mind. She put me through hours of cognitive tests, memory, recall, logic puzzles, complex financial problem solving. It was grueling, but I answered every question with a clarity and focus born of pure adrenaline. I was fighting for my mind, and I would not lose. While I was undergoing evaluations, Mr. Miller was building a fortress of evidence. He subpoenaed David and Tiffany's financial records. He wanted to show the court exactly how they had been living, what they had been spending my money on. He also began deposing their witnesses, the family and friends they had primed with their story of my decline. My sister Jean was the first. She was terrified, caught between her love for me and her loyalty to her nephew. Mr. Miller was gentle but relentless. "Mrs. O'Connell," he asked, "in all the years you've known your sister, have you ever seen her make an irrational financial decision before this incident?" "No," Jean admitted reluctantly. "Carol has always been the most sensible one of us." "And when David told you his mother was unwell, did he provide any specific medical diagnosis from a doctor? Any proof at all other than his own opinion?" "No. He just said she wasn't acting like herself." "Not acting like herself, Mr. Cation," Miller repeated slowly. "Or not acting like the mother he was accustomed to, the one who funded his life without question?" Jean had no answer. The first crack in their wall appeared unexpectedly. The auto lender, having received our formal notification and David and Tiffany's subsequent failure to make a payment, sent them a stark notice. Refinance the loan or the vehicle would be repossessed. Panic must have set in because one evening, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered cautiously. It was Tiffany's sister, Jessica, the one who had been at the secret wedding, beaming in the photographs. Her voice was nervous and apologetic. Carol? It's Jessica. Listen, I know I have no right to ask you this, but Tiffany is a mess. They're going to take her car. She can't get a loan on her own. She asked me to co-sign, but I can't. My husband would kill me. She took a shaky breath. Is there any way you can just help them one more time? Just with the car? For the sake of peace? The old Carol would have melted. The old Carol would have heard the desperation and felt the familiar tug of responsibility. But the new Carol heard something else. She heard leverage. I'm sorry, Jessica, I said, my voice calm and polite. But my lawyer is handling all communication with the family now. I'm not able to discuss it. Lawyer? She squeaked. But this is family. Oh, wait, that's a distinction your sister and her husband seem to have forgotten, I said, and I gently ended the call. The second crack came from a place I never would have predicted. I received an email from an old friend, a woman named Martha whom I hadn't seen in over a year. She was part of a book club I used to attend before my life became consumed with David and Tiffany's needs. Dear Carol, the email read, I am writing to you because something has been weighing heavily on my conscience. Tiffany Harris is in my yoga class. A few weeks ago, after class, she was talking to a group of us. She was telling everyone how difficult things have been with her ailing mother-in-law. She said you were suffering from early onset dementia and had become paranoid and hostile. She was crying as she told us how she and David were trying to get you the help you needed, but you were resisting. She made it sound like they were saints. I didn't think much of it at the time, other than feeling sorry for her. But then I ran into your sister Jean at the grocery store, and she told me you were suing David. The two stories didn't add up. Carol, I've known you for 20 years. You are one of the sharpest, most grounded women I know. If you are willing, I would be honored to provide a character statement on your behalf and testify to what I witnessed Tiffany saying. What she is doing is wrong. I stared at the email, tears welling in my eyes. These were not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude. In the midst of the isolation and the betrayal, a hand had reached out. Someone had seen through the lies. Someone had chosen to believe in me. This was more than just a character witness. It was proof. It was proof that Tiffany wasn't just a concerned daughter-in-law. She was a performer, actively and publicly fabricating a story of my dementia to garner sympathy and build her case. I immediately forwarded the email to Mr. Miller. His reply was instantaneous. Bingo, it said. The walls they had built around me, the walls of lies and manipulation, were starting to show cracks. They had underestimated me. They saw me as a lonely, grieving widow, an easy mark. They never imagined that this lonely widow had a core of steel. They had thought they could isolate me, but they had forgotten that a lifetime of integrity builds its own kind of army. Friends, professionals, even reluctant family members when forced under oath to tell the truth would become my soldiers. A week later, the guardian ad litem was appointed. Her name was Sarah Jennings. She was a no-nonsense social worker in her 50s with eyes that seemed to see right through you. Her first call was to me. She wanted to meet at my home. She wanted to see how I lived. The day she came, I didn't try to put on a show. I just offered her a cup of tea and sat with her in my living room. The one David and Tiffany claimed was the home of a recluse. I answered all of her questions honestly, even the difficult ones about my grief for Frank and my complicated love for my son. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply presented the facts. At the end of our 2-hour meeting, I handed her a copy of my completed psychiatric evaluation, which had concluded I was of superior cognitive function, and a printed copy of the email from my friend Martha. As she read the email, I saw her expression flicker for just a moment. It was a subtle shift, but it was there. It was the look of a professional who has just found a key piece of a very ugly puzzle. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Adams, she said, her tone professional but not unkind as she stood to leave. I have a meeting with your son and his wife this afternoon. As I closed the door behind her, I knew the battle was far from over. But for the first time, I felt a flicker of something that had been extinguished for weeks. I felt hope. They had built their case on a foundation of lies. And lies, I knew, were like poorly built walls. Under enough pressure, they always, eventually, crumble. Sarah Jennings, the Guardian ad litem, left my house and drove directly to David and Tiffany's downtown condo, the one my money had secured. I knew this because Mr. Miller, with a strategic foresight I was beginning to deeply admire, had already laid the groundwork. He had provided Miss Jennings with a comprehensive file that included not just my side of the story, but a map of their lives, financially and socially. He wanted her to see the full picture, not just the carefully edited one they would present. I spent that afternoon in a state of suspended animation, pacing my living room, unable to settle. My entire future felt like it was being decided in that condo, a space I had paid for but was no longer welcome in. I imagined the scene. Tiffany, a vision of worried sincerity, offering Miss Jennings a perfectly brewed artisanal coffee. David, his face a mask of filial concern, speaking in low, somber tones about his mother's tragic decline. They were performers, and this was their opening night. I could only pray that Miss Jennings was a discerning critic. Later, Mr. Miller called me. He had spoken to Miss Jennings for a post-meeting debrief. While she couldn't share the full details of her confidential interview, she had given him a general impression. She said they were very polished, Mr. Miller relayed, and I could hear the wryness in his tone. Tiffany cried. Twice. David spoke at length about how this was the hardest thing he's ever had to do, but he was willing to step up and manage my affairs to protect me from myself. So she believed them, I said, my heart sinking. Not so fast, Carol, he said. Polished is not the same as convincing. Sarah Jennings has been doing this for 20 years. She can smell a performance a mile away. She asked them some pointed questions. He told me she had started with their finances. Armed with the records he had provided, she asked them to explain their income versus their expenditures. How, on a junior graphic designer's salary and a part-time marketing assistant's wages, could they afford their lifestyle? The new SUV, the Napa vacations, the designer clothes Tiffany showcased on her social media? David, apparently, had been ready for this. My mother has always been incredibly generous, he had explained smoothly. She insisted on helping us. It was her greatest joy. So, you don't feel that accepting over $100,000 from a retired widow on a fixed income was in any way taking advantage of her? Miss? Jennings had asked, her question as sharp and clean as a surgeon's cut. According to Mr. Miller, a flicker of panic had crossed David's face before he recovered. Of course not. It was a gift. A mother helping her son. We never thought she was keeping a running tally. That's what's so disturbing about her recent behavior. This sudden obsession with money is completely out of character. It's one of the main symptoms of her decline. It was a brilliant pivot. He had taken their greatest weakness, their blatant financial dependency, and twisted it into another piece of evidence against me. But Miss Jennings had then pulled out the email from my friend, Martha. Mrs. Harris, she had said to Tiffany, her voice neutral. I was made aware that you recently told members of your yoga class that your mother-in-law is suffering from early-onset dementia. Can you tell me where you got that diagnosis? The silence that followed, Mr. Miller said, was profound. Tiffany, caught completely off guard, had stammered. Well, it wasn't a formal diagnosis. It was just what we observed. Her paranoia, her memory loss. Memory loss? Miss Jennings pressed. Can you give me a specific example of something significant she has forgotten? Tiffany, flustered, had mumbled something about me forgetting a lunch date a few months back. A lunch date I had never made. So you, with no medical training, diagnosed your mother-in-law with a serious neurological condition, and then shared that diagnosis with a group of casual acquaintances? Miss? Jennings had summarized. Does that seem like the action of a concerned daughter-in-law? Or one who is trying to build a public narrative? Tiffany had, for the first time, been rendered speechless. The poised, grieving victim had been exposed as a gossip, a manipulator. The final, and perhaps most crucial, part of the interview had been about the future. Let's say the court does appoint a guardian. Miss Jennings had posited. Mr. Harris, as the proposed guardian, what would be your first action? And there, in his arrogance, David had made his fatal mistake. Well, he had said, puffing out his chest with a sense of magnanimous responsibility. First, we would consolidate her assets to ensure they are managed properly. She's got money scattered in all these different accounts that are probably underperforming. Then, we would assess her living situation. Her house is far too big for one person. It's a huge expense. We would sell it and move her into a more appropriate and manageable assisted living facility. And of course, he had added, with a final benevolent flourish, we would use the proceeds from the sale to ensure she receives the best possible care and to secure our own family's future, as she always wanted. He had laid his entire plan bare. Sell her house, put her in a home, take the money. He hadn't framed it as a last resort. He had presented it as his primary objective. He had confessed, in the most damning way possible, that his petition for guardianship was nothing more than a thinly veiled estate plan for a woman who was still very much alive. He wasn't trying to protect his mother. He was trying to cash in his inheritance early. When Mr. Miller finished relaying the story, I was quiet for a long moment. I felt a cold, hollow ache in my chest. To hear, in such stark terms, the future my own son had planned for me